Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're uncovering the hidden life of something so incredibly common you probably haven't given it a second thought today. Yep, we're talking about water. But we aren't just going to look at it as some passive backdrop, a simple solvent where the actual chemistry of life just happens to take place. No way. We're going to see how water is the dynamic, active architect of life itself.
Okay, let's just dive right into this with a number you've probably heard before, but honestly, it really bears repeating: 70. Water makes up 70% or more of the weight of most living organisms. Think about that. The very first living things on Earth arose in an aqueous environment, and the entire course of evolution, literally everything that followed, has been shaped by the unique properties of this one medium.
So we have to ask the core question here. Why? Why is water so deeply, fundamentally essential to life? What is it about this specific molecule that allows complex biological machines to even function? Well, to answer that, we have to transition from basic biology facts into the heavy, high-stakes chemistry of life.
And that brings us to Section 1, the secrets of water.
The real secret to water's unique behavior all comes down to the hydrogen bond. Picture a water molecule. It's shaped a bit like a wide V. The oxygen atom right at the center is highly electronegative, which basically means it's a bit of a resource hog. It pulls the shared electrons away from the two hydrogen atoms. And this unequal sharing creates an electric dipole. So the oxygen becomes slightly negative and the hydrogens become slightly positive. Because opposites attract, the oxygen of one water molecule naturally links up with the hydrogen of a neighboring one. But here's the crazy part. These aren't permanent fixtures. In liquid water, these hydrogen bonds are rapidly forming and breaking. The lifespan of each bond is just 1 to 20 picoseconds. Because they're constantly snapping and reforming in this chaotic dance, scientists use the incredibly apt phrase flickering clusters to describe them.
Moving right along into Section 2, the power of weak interactions.
We can broadly divide molecules into two camps based on how they handle water. First, we have hydrophilic, or water-loving molecules. These are polar or charged compounds. Think salts and sugars. Water easily dissolves them by surrounding their ions and forming favorable new hydrogen bonds. But then we have hydrophobic, or water-fearing molecules, like fats and waxes. These are nonpolar. They literally cannot form hydrogen bonds with water. So when you drop them into an aqueous environment, the water molecules are forced to form this highly ordered, rigid cage around them. To minimize this unfavorable state, those hydrophobic molecules are forced to cluster tightly together, almost like they're huddling to avoid the water, which naturally forms structures like lipid micelles.
Now, this clustering effect we just talked about is one of four crucial weak interactions at play here. We've got hydrogen bonds, ionic interactions, hydrophobic interactions, and van der Waals interactions, which are just these super fleeting attractions between neighboring electron clouds. Now, here is the absolute crucial takeaway. Individually, every single one of these forces is weak. I mean, way weaker than a standard covalent bond. But in a biological system, they don't act alone. Their cumulative power is astonishing. It's the synchronized push and pull of thousands of these weak interactions working together that folds a protein into its precise 3D shape and actually holds the massive, complex double helix of DNA together.
Just to give this some historical and scientific gravity, check out this quote from the legendary chemist Linus Pauling back in 1939. He stated his belief that the significance of the hydrogen bond would be found to be greater than that of any other single structural feature in physiology. And you know what? Decades of subsequent biochemistry have proven him absolutely right. He hit the nail on the head.
Let's scale things up a bit now to Section 3, Osmosis, the battle for balance.
Think of cells as basically just bags of concentrated solutes, separated from the outside world by a semi-permeable membrane. Because water always wants to equalize the concentration of solutes on both sides, it constantly moves across this membrane. And this movement? That's osmosis. Cells have to constantly battle this osmotic pressure. If you drop a cell into a hypertonic solution, meaning there are more solutes outside than inside, water just rushes out and the cell violently shrinks up. But if you drop it into a hypotonic solution, where there are more solutes inside than outside, water floods in, swelling the cell until it literally bursts like a water balloon, which we call osmotic lysis.
And this brilliantly illustrates how nature uses this pressure to its advantage. Plants actually use osmosis to stand upright. They load their cells with high concentrations of solutes, which naturally draws water in. But instead of bursting, their tough, non-expandable cell walls push right back. This creates turgor pressure, providing mechanical rigidity to the whole plant. To ground this in a relatable analogy, when a lettuce leaf wilts in your salad, you are witnessing a loss of this exact turgor pressure on a macro level as the water just escapes.
Let's transition now to Section 4, Decoding the pH Scale.
Water has a very slight but incredibly vital tendency to ionize. That just means it breaks apart into a hydrogen ion and a hydroxide ion. This ionization is the entire basis of the pH scale, which measures the concentration of those hydrogen ions. Now keep in mind this scale is logarithmic, so a drop of just one single point actually means 10 times the amount of hydrogen ions. Gastric juice in our stomachs is a highly acidic 1.5. A typical cola drink is around 3.0. But look at human blood. It sits at a highly specific 7.4. It's this incredibly narrow critical window required just so the enzymes of our blood can function properly.
So, if our blood strictly needs to stay at 7.4, but our bodies are constantly producing and consuming acids and bases through normal metabolism, how do we even survive? Well, that takes us to Section 5, Buffers, Biological Shock Absorbers.
Buffers act exactly like molecular shock absorbers. They're aqueous systems made of mixtures of weak acids and their conjugate bases. If a sudden spike of acid hits the system, the conjugate base simply absorbs it. If a spike of base hits, the weak acid neutralizes it. Using something called the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, we can mathematically see exactly how these buffers flatten out the pH curve, resisting what would otherwise be sudden, fatal shifts in our body's chemistry.
And guys, there is a wild, high-stakes history behind discovering how these buffers work. Back in 1928, a scientist named J.B.S. Haldane wanted to know exactly what happens when human blood turns too acidic. But unwilling to use a rabbit, because, well, he couldn't ask a rabbit how it felt, Haldane used himself. He literally drank diluted hydrochloric acid and sat in airtight chambers filled with heavy carbon dioxide just to self-induce severe acid poisoning. He gave himself violent headaches, extreme shortness of breath, all to map out the extreme limits of our body's buffering capacity. Talk about dedication to science, right?
What Haldane was manipulating is a primary defense system we all have, the bicarbonate buffer system. Let's break this complex chemical equation down into a physical journey. Step 1. Acidic hydrogen ions enter your blood from your tissues. Step 2. Bicarbonate in your blood reacts with those ions, safely locking them up into carbonic acid. Step 3. That carbonic acid travels all the way to your lungs, where it converts into dissolved carbon dioxide and water. And finally, Step 4. That CO2 enters your lungs' airspace as a gas, and you just breathe it out. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is this: breathing out carbon dioxide literally prevents our blood from turning into a deadly acid.
When this system is overwhelmed, the result is a massive medical emergency called acidosis, a life-threatening drop in blood pH below 7.35. We see this super vividly in untreated diabetes. Without insulin to process glucose, the body is forced to rely on stored fatty acids for fuel. Burning these fats floods the bloodstream with carboxylic acids, which rapidly overwhelms the blood's buffers, tanks the pH, and leads to stupor, coma, and honestly worse if it's not treated immediately.
All right, let's move to our final section, Section 6, the architect of life.
We've seen the atoms, the cells, and the blood, but we need to remember that water isn't just a passive environment, it's an active reactant. In biology, to build complex polymers, cells use condensation reactions, which means they actively eliminate a water molecule to fuse two things together. To break them apart, they use hydrolysis, adding water to snap the bonds. Every single time your body accesses energy by breaking down an ATP molecule, water is an active reactant in that process. Furthermore, in photosynthesis, plants use the energy of sunlight to literally split water molecules apart, using it as the fundamental electron donor that powers pretty much all life on Earth.
On top of its chemistry, water has these incredible physical properties, almost like superpowers, that make this world habitable. It has a high specific heat, meaning it acts as a global heat buffer, keeping our planet's temperature stable. It has a high heat of vaporization, which is exactly what allows vertebrates to cool themselves down by sweating. Its internal cohesion allows towering trees to pull water all the way up from their roots against gravity. And, astonishingly, its solid form ice is less dense than liquid water, so it floats. This means ponds freeze from the top down, insulating the aquatic life below in the winter instead of freezing them completely solid.
Which really leaves us with this final provocative thought. We've seen how water dictates the shape of proteins, how it protects our cellular borders, balances our blood pH, and insulates our entire ecosystems. Its properties are so specific and so perfectly tailored to the complex chemistry of survival that we really have to wonder, if life exists elsewhere in the universe, could it possibly exist without water? It's definitely something to think about the next time you pour yourself a glass. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and as always, keep asking the big questions.